Amazon is gearing up to release the fourth and final season of The Man in the High Castle. I'm Riley Chow of Gold Derby, here with Lawson Deming, the senior visual effects supervisor on the show. Now, Lawson, as a Vancouverite, watching the show is kind of a game for me, trying to figure out, where you're shooting and what's fake. So I want to know, what is the bane of your existence in translating Vancouver? Like, what do you always have to remove because it wouldn't make sense in alt history, Nazi-led 60s America?
There are a lot of bike lanes in Vancouver, way more than I think existed anywhere in the 1960s. And so that's a thing that we found very frequently on street scenes where we would need to, paint out these big green swaths of green painted concrete, oftentimes with dividers next to them as well, that separate them from the main flow of traffic. And so, we dealt with stuff like that. In some cases, it was actually easier for us to just shoot scenes in a parking lot and completely replace everything, rather than deal with the issues with like the size and shape of the streets.
Now, I get a kick out of how, the kids, they attend the same high school as the kids in Riverdale. What have you noticed about other sci-fi takes on Vancouver, like Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, and how have you differentiated your show from those takes?
I mean, Vancouver's a very versatile city. And in The Man in the High Castle, it stands in for pretty much everywhere that we depict in the show. It's New York City, it's like upstate New York, it is San Francisco, it is Colorado and other areas of the neutral zone. There are even some scenes where we're pretending that it is Berlin. We've shot pretty much everywhere around Vancouver, and we've used it in all different kinds of ways. Obviously, the benefit of my job as a visual effects supervisor is that I can either change what's already there, or we can, get rid of it completely. We've removed entire skylines and replaced them. We've augmented buildings. Like the post office downtown is used as a sort of experimental science building, and we changed the facade of that and added a bunch of signage to that. Sometimes we've even used the same location multiple times to be different things. It's sort of the magic of movie making, that you can reuse things every which way. And in a way, when you treat an entire city kind of like a set, you do things like you do with a set. If you watch any show carefully enough, you'll see that they're reusing sets and say, oh, that room looks the same shape as that other one that I saw 3 episodes ago. It probably is the same room, just redressed and rebuilt. And we do that kind of thing all the time. And there's all kinds of shows shooting in Vancouver all the time. We bump into them every day, or drive past them in scout vans, and they got the same idea. They're using the same locations as we do.
Now, the show, of course, takes place in this alternate history, but for a while, I kind of thought that would be where the sci-fi would end. How aware were you that that magic and kind of fantastical elements would be increasingly playing a role in the show, especially in the 3rd season that we just saw?
Yeah, the book on which the show is based is very sort of coy about how it plays with the sort of fantastical elements of the world. This idea of traveling is sort of just hinted at. And so we've obviously taken that much farther in the show. I think even though the show does get more sort of fantastical and more sci-fi than it may have seemed like it was going to be at first, there is still so much of it that's grounded in a sense of sort of historical reality. It's not our history, but it is a history that we try to be faithful to in terms of what we create. And so I always treat it personally like a historical show. And we do research as if we're researching history as well, and make changes to it based on how our world has developed differently. So To a certain extent, we did not know, and it is sort of developed over time. These sort of more fantastical elements have grown over the course of the run of the show, and I was not aware of them at first, really at all, except for what's sort of hinted at. But I think in spite of the fact that we've gone more fantastical with some of the elements, it's always grounded to a kind of realism, which is what makes the show effective.
And do you have like an average day, some things that you are always doing, or is it just always whatever happens to be the top priority?
I mean, the best thing about this job, I would say, is that there's no such thing as an average day, in the sense that we're always encountering new challenges, always dealing with, some weird thing that we never thought we would think about, let alone have to learn the details about some past historical event or metallurgy or something like that necessary for us to build some of the effect sequences that we do. When I'm in production, I do a lot of meetings. We talk again about the scripts. We have meetings about the visual effects and the budget for the visual effects. Because nowadays you really can do almost anything with visual effects, but it's a factor of your budget and your time. And there's never enough of either of those things. And so the big challenge is not, can we do this? It's how do we do this with what we've got in the time that we have? And so there's a lot of discussion about that. When I'm on set, movie set days usually last around 12 hours. And so that's all day on set. Oftentimes sitting around waiting for a long time for them to get to the stuff that's visual effects pertinent. And then when visual effects questions come up, or when the green screens come out and they say, well, what do we see back here? What's the angle on this? How should we light this? That's what I'm on set for. As a visual effects supervisor, my job is really to be able to envision things that haven't been shot yet, or that no one else can see except for me, because they're in my head. And so I'm sort of the facilitator of that on set, is saying, oh, you should frame the camera for this thing that I know is going to be there, but that you can't see because we haven't put it in yet. It's just a green screen. So that's usually how my days are. It's either, in production, in meetings, on set, and then of course now in post, working with my team, looking at the shots, reviewing them, and sending them to the show.
How much more do you have on the final season to do?
We literally have just delivered this morning the final episode of season 4. There are some straggling shots from previous episodes that we may look at again, time necessitating. But yeah, we are delivered as of today on the show.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Now I'll ask, how satisfying is the Man in the High Castle finale? And also, how satisfying is the Silicon Valley finale, which is another show that you work on that's also ending this fall?
Yeah. Finales are obviously very bittersweet, especially on shows that are really special. Man in the High Castle is special because it was an experience that is very unlike anything we've ever worked on. I think the people that we work with on it, the fact that everyone is so collaborative and everyone is pulling in the same direction is very refreshing. We all help one another out, and we're all building this thing that we all get to contribute to. And I think for me, it is really enjoyable to mix the sort of science fiction with the history, and kind of try and become a historian for a time period that doesn't actually exist, and treat the research we do as if we were doing historical research, try to be faithful to these sort of made up ideas. In that sense, the finale is unsatisfying, because I think we've created such a detailed world that we're not done exploring it. There are 1,000 other ideas, there are 1,000 other things that we could explore in this world, because it's been built so believably that you kind of think about everything. How does international travel work? These rocket planes and monorails in the cities, and the development of the relations between the Nazis and the Japanese forces, and the testing of nuclear bombs. Like, there's all these things, and we have so much of our own history to set it against in terms of a comparison. Like, we could look at the next, from the 1960s through the 80s, would certainly be fascinating to have a show like The Man in the High Castle set against. So in that case, it's kind of sad that we're not going to be able to continue. But, from a narrative standpoint, I hope that everyone's going to be satisfied with the way that this show ends. I think it's ending on its own terms. It's not just being cut off. So that I think has given us the time to put together some really cool stuff for the show. Silicon Valley's a funny show because obviously it's a great show, and I'm like the perfect demographic to be able to appreciate it because I, love nerdy tech humor, and I work in a nerdy tech world. And Silicon Valley is a show that has sort of mirrored the growth of my company, because when we started working on Silicon Valley in the first season, I think there were like 5 or 6 of us at Barnstorm, which is the company that I started with Corey Jameson, and now we're at around 70 people. And so as the show has sort of tackled issues like human resources and scaling and disagreements between employees and stuff like that, like, we've seen sort of the same thing happening at the company that we founded. We're obviously nowhere near as huge as Pied Piper, nor are we as dysfunctional as Pied Piper, but it's been a couple of shows that have had a very big impact on me, and that I've been really happy to work on.
All right, thanks. Finally, I'll just ask, you're nominated this year for the episode Yarnol, the season finale from the 3rd season of Man in the High Castle. Mm-hmm. So how did you choose that episode, and how did you put together your reel?
Yeah, there are a lot of good episodes of season 3 in terms of having some cool visual effects set pieces. It was actually kind of hard in a way for us to decide, because we have a big New York City sequence in episode 6, where John Smith is installed as the Reichsmarshal, with a parade and views of Central Park in New York City that were all digitally created. We had the Japanese fleet in episode 2 coming into San Francisco, and of course we have the Statue of Liberty destruction in New York City in episode 10, which was obviously sort of a big season finale type event. I think we knew we wanted to submit the Statue of Liberty just because it was one of the most ambitious things, if not the most ambitious sequence we've ever done for a show. But it's tricky because, with the Emmys, you're submitting a single episode. You're not submitting the work that you've done over the course of the season. And there are certainly shows, in the same category as we are, special visual effects, that probably have as many visual effects in one episode as we have in our entire season. Just in terms of scope, there's stuff with planets exploding and giant battles, and they just have, hundreds and hundreds of effect shots in a single episode. And we have 600 over the course of the season. And I think that episode, Yarnol, only had maybe 50 or 60 visual effects shots in it. So it is sort of, it is a representative of the visual effects on the series as a whole, but it is a tough decision to pick that, knowing that we have a lot of other stuff that we're very proud of. The other thing that's tricky about it is there are 2 categories for visual effects in the Emmys. There's special visual effects and there's supporting visual effects. And in a way, since The Man in the High Castle started as a show, there have been such growth in the number of sort of big science fiction and fantasy shows that, we fit more in the vein of like a historical show almost. which is a lot of what ends up in the supporting visual effects role is shows that are sort of historically set. Now our show is historically set, but it's also a science fiction historical period. So we do find ourselves up against Game of Thrones and Star Treks and all those big things. And it was I don't want to say it was a surprise to get the nomination, but I certainly felt very proud of the fact that we managed to land a nomination against such a field of sort of heavy-hitting shows.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much for chatting, Lawson, and best of luck at the Emmys.
Thank you very much.
And to our viewers, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and also go to goldderby.com to log your own Emmy predictions.